Hello, everybody. We are back live here on the Tim and Jim Show with our guest of honor, Mitch Jackson. Mitch, thank you so much for being here, and sorry for the technical difficulties.
Tim and Jim, it's good to be here. I apologize. Hopefully it wasn't at my end, but it's good to be here, and we're going to be talking about a very important topic. So,
yeah, absolutely. And we can hear you, and hopefully everyone out there that hopefully is jumping back on can hear us as well. But we were talking about the fact that, this is obviously one of the top topics in the news, and we're really approaching it from a different aspect today. We're looking at it from the legal aspects of it. And as you know, we have one of the top trial lawyers in California, and also who I consider one of the top social media experts in really showing how a service-based business can use social media to get their message out. I mean, I think you're everywhere as far as that goes, Mitch. Even on TikTok, you've got more talks and ticks than Tim or I do. But you also make
too many TikToks. Come on.
But you were talking before we had to reboot, which it just shows you guys it happens. Tell us again about the Princess Cruise Line scenario that you just wrote an article about today.
Sure. So, this all started for me last Wednesday or Thursday, where I had a couple of clients reach out, they're professional speakers, and their events were canceled. Mitch, what are my rights? What are my remedies? How would you handle this? What should I do? Right. And so that's how this started for me. And it allowed me to kind of roll into writing a blog post later on that night that focused on what options, remedies, and rights professional speakers have when their conferences are canceled, when a conference organizer says, you know what, Tim and Jim, we want you to not be on stage, but we want you to be available at night to do a webinar instead. We want to cancel. What are the different things you should have in your contracts? I talked about event planners, some things they may want to take into consideration, and then attendees. What things should attendees take into consideration? And so when I spoke about the Princess cruise ship situation, and by the way, how's my audio? Are we doing okay?
Great.
Game on? Okay. So I had someone ask me, well, Mitch, how could a conference or an event be held liable because of the coronavirus or another infectious disease? My article was written in a more broad brushstroke sense. In other words, if something major happens, coronavirus is the topic right now. Be an infectious disease, it could be a terrorist attack, it could be a natural disaster, whatever the issue may be, we need to be prepared, especially as speakers. And an example would be the Princess cruise ship that had 19 to 21 confirmed coronavirus victims on the ship. I think 19 were employees. Check the stats on that, you guys. That's not the point. That docked. Some people are quarantined on the ship. Some people are allowed to get off for medical health care and treatment. But the point is, imagine if Jim and Tim and I were scheduled to be speakers on this cruise this upcoming weekend on a 3-day conference, which happens all the time with cruise ships. Sure. And Princess did not sanitize or sterilize the ship. They did not replace those 19 employees with new, healthy employees. 1,000 people get on the ship, and let's just say a lot of people become ill, in this case because of the coronavirus. Would Princess or any of their management companies be held responsible, and should they, for exposing all of us to the coronavirus? I think the answer is fairly obvious. The answer is yes. They knew there was a problem. They failed to remedy that problem. They failed to warn against that problem, and they took in money in exchange for helping us protect our own health and safety. That's an extreme example, but I think you could carry over that rationale to small and large conferences around the world. So as speakers, one of the things I think is really important is for all of us to look at our speaker agreements and make sure we have the provisions that we need in our cancellation clauses, in our insurance coverage clauses, and in our indemnity or reimbursement clauses in our speaking agreements. This is a great opportunity to take a step back and make sure we've got all the clauses we need in our speaking agreements, not only to protect us, but also to protect our teams that travel with us when we speak. For some of us, that just may be our families, but I can't think of a more important team than our family teams. And also helps protect the event organizers from any unexpected cancellations. Everything is clear and set forth in writing.
Right. And you bring up a great point, Mitch, that something just this is, this may be something that continues. I know there's a lot of concern in the long run of other pandemic type things occurring. And even South by Southwest, when they canceled their event, which had an impact on the city of Austin of $350 million. And I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day about the fact that they did not have coverage specifically for a cancellation due to infectious disease. And it's putting the future of that conference at complete risk. And
Sure.
so it's really going to be, from an insurance standpoint, something that you really need to seriously take into consideration in the future, where before, it's kind of like, it's like earthquake insurance in Atlanta, right? I might not think about it, but in California, you definitely do.
We definitely do think about it, especially when you look at the price of homes here in California. So whether you're a speaker, whether you're a conference or event planner, or you're an attendee, see what type of insurance coverage you have. If you're a speaker, do you have a loss of business or business interruption coverage? Okay. If you have employees that are traveling with you, God forbid they get sick, God forbid something happens to them, do you have any type of general liability or liability coverage to cover all of these different contingencies? If you're an event, do you have good health insurance, not only for your employees, but for volunteers that are on the site, for people, third parties, physically accessing your event site? Is there any type of coverage to help protect this? And as an attendee, does your health insurance cover any infections, for example, coronavirus infections that you may pick up while you're traveling to one of these events? Or is it specifically included? So Jim, like you just said, paying attention to what type of insurance coverage you have is critically important. As a speaker, you want to make sure that you are falling under any insurance coverage offered by the event or event planner. Oftentimes they can add you to their rider. And if not, they're entering into what's called an indemnification clause, where if you spend out of pocket for medical bills and treatment for whatever reason, you trip on an open hole, you break your arm, you walk through the door and hug it out with 10 people who all happen to have coronavirus. And the long story short, at the end of the week, you're sick, you're injured, you're incurring bills. If you have an indemnification clause, then you can actually, it's agreed between you and the event planner that they'll reimburse you for your medical bill. So there's all types of things that you can put into your contracts to help protect you from any unforeseen or reasonably expected contingencies. And I had two yesterday. I like trying cases. I'm a litigator. I'm not a paper pushing kind of guy. Right. I'm not interested in I do speaking agreements for some of the top speakers that we all know, and brand ambassador agreements. It's just not something I really enjoy doing, just being honest and transparent here. But the point is I had a couple people yesterday reach out with their agreements because their events have been canceled. And hey, Mitch, what are my rights? What are my remedies? Yeah. And there's another, take a step back. What kind of relationship do you want to have with the event planner, right? These things happen. How do you want to work with the event planners in moving forward? Do you want to hold them to the terms and conditions of the agreement, or do you want to be flexible and create long-term goodwill and a long-term relationship? And that's usually the way I roll. And I know a lot of you out there that aren't used to hearing lawyers say that. That's the way I roll. And I usually tell my clients to just chill out and let's work through this together and create a win-win, situation. But I'll also tell you that there are gifted keynote speakers that are awesome on stage that come across terrible on a live video or in a recorded webinar. And you need to have in your contract the option of you making that decision if you want to take your stage presentation to the digital platform. And if it's going to dilute your brand, if it's not going to help you do what you do professionally, you might want to have the option to opt out of an online webinar or something like this. On the other side of the coin, it's really smart to be able to handle yourself in both venues, right? I mean, this is the future of speaking, of presentations, because if it's not the coronavirus, what's it going to be next year? right? If it's not an earthquake in California, what's it going to be on the East Coast 2 years from now? And so you want to have those options so that you can pick what works best for you, your career, the topic, the product, the service that you're representing, and also what works out best for the event planners. You want it to be a good experience for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really good opportunity for people like speakers and others involved with events that maybe they do them just occasionally or they're just getting started. I think this is really great, valuable information, because I'm sure there's a lot of things we're talking about that they're not thinking about. Like, for example, I know I've hosted events and, so I've been through the rigmarole of figuring out the whole insurance aspect. I was like, really, I have to get this insurance? It costs that much to put on this event? And, but it's important, right?
It's you need to sit down with your insurance agent. If you don't have one, find one who deals with business liability coverage, umbrella coverage, loss of use, loss of business, attendees at your event. What type of coverage is available in case something unforeseen, something even intentional happens? What are the parameters? Another thing, Tim, that you just mentioned that reminded me is if you're putting on a large event, you guys, very, very smart to bring in a premises liability expert and an infectious disease expert before the event. They may be able to do this digitally. I don't know if they need to physically be looking at your location, but you might be able to walk through with a 360 camera and have them give you an analysis as to whether or not from a physical premises liability standpoint, and then from an infectious disease standpoint, have you taken reasonable and necessary precautions? Okay, because most experts will be able to take a look and say, you need to do this, 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 and this, and then you're good to go. And so that's maybe a new element that we'll have to incorporate into larger events. I just read yesterday that Coachella was canceled or postponed until the end of the year. And I get that. I mean, that to me was just a potential petri dish of problems, right? For so many different reasons. I don't know if you guys have been to Coachella. And so if you're having an event like that, you bring in your experts, let them look at all of the factors, and then they can tell you exactly what your next step should be, including whether or not you should cancel the conference. So there's a whole new set of duties which are obligations and responsibilities for your audience members, where there are legal duties that you have a duty to provide a reasonably safe premises, venue for your attendees. And if you breach that duty and somebody's injured, somebody becomes ill, you may be responsible for their damages. The law is different in each state. Check with a lawyer in your state if you have any questions. But I think this does raise many new questions, many new issues. And it may not be a bad thing. Maybe this is a conversation we need to have in the speaking world.
And I think that's a great point, Mitch. And this what you've been saying. That's why I kind of put this banner on the bottom, is you are really addressing some of those tips for the conference and event planners. But even, I guess, a step further is, as an example, I've been a workshop presenter, just as Tim has been as well. And a lot of times that's been in person. But now some of these planners are going to really have to start seriously think about, okay, we want to have this workshop, but we're going to need to move it to online. And maybe it pushes that genesis for online. Like, we all love doing things in person, but for the safety and health of all concerned, the technology is there, and maybe it gets people to move forward. And I think you're addressing some key issues. And I think along those same lines, for these planners, how does this affect, would you say, like local networking events? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are, I've always been a people person. Some of the biggest cases and deals I've ever closed were via a handshake out in the hallway after going like this for 8 hours in chambers with judges and mediators, and everybody's, positioning themselves, a bunch of alpha males and alpha females doing their dog and pony show in front of their clients. And then you walk out in the hallway and, you both enjoy paddle boarding. You steer the conversation to paddle boarding during the sunset. everyone takes a deep breath and you close the deal. So I love personal networking. Having said that, I think this opens up the coronavirus, infectious disease, all of the issues that we're talking about. I think it opens up a new business opportunity for anyone that understands the importance of producing a very entertaining, unique, memorable type of live video show or conference or webinar. And, whether it's local, Jim, like you just mentioned, or a global type of conference where it's quick, it's pithy, it's entertaining, almost like watching a well-produced television entertainment show where you've got 3-second clips and music and it's not just going live, it's live 10x. I think people that figure that out are positioning themselves really for the next 20 years in a whole new industry that's got unlimited upside potential. When you add the power of digital, 5G, AI, and everything else in between into what we're talking about, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think people are going to start looking at digital video and live video, however you want to describe it, as an option to keep their employees safe, to reduce cost of travel and travel-related expenses, and to maximize, or let's just say minimize, unforeseen circumstances. Like you said at the top of the hour, there are a lot of companies taking huge hits for whatever reason. So as a CEO, as a member of the board of directors, do I want to authorize that conference in 2021 or even 2022 and have this happen to me again? There's so much going on out there that's beyond my control. Most businesses do not operate where they're rolling the dice each year on a huge issue that's beyond their control. So from a business standpoint, a management standpoint, yeah, I see this going back into a more controlled environment that has less to do with where people are located for health reasons, and it has more to do with saving costs, saving time, saving money. And if you do it right, if you have the right production crew, you could put on an entertaining show that people can watch on their laptops, they can watch on their phones, or maybe in a couple of years when they come out with Google Glass 3.0, which I've always been a fan of, by the way. You watch the whole show on Google Glass while you're doing a run on the beach. I mean, that's kind of where we're going to go.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Tim, you want to ask Mitch this question?
Sure. So Mitch, what are your tips for attendees of events like these?
Which to me is like one of the most important things, Tim. I would suggest you reach out to the conference. What type of health and safety steps, protocols are you taking? And the answer is you want them to provide plenty of bathroom facilities, plenty of ways that you can wash your hands, plenty of ways that they are offering maybe different screening checks with respect to where they're allowing people to come in from. Is it an international event? Is it a local small community event? I think as an attendee, I know for me, that would probably make a difference if I needed to be there or not. I don't want to walk into a high risk, hot zone of coronavirus or any other infectious disease. So reach out and ask, what are they doing to help protect their attendees and also their employees, their volunteers, their speakers, number one. Number two, as an attendee, I would reach out, and when I purchase a ticket, or if I'm a speaker and a lot of us speak and then we also attend the event, I would see whether or not I'm signing a waiver as part of the ticket purchase or as part of my speaking agreement, where I'm waiving my rights. Am I being asked to waive my rights for anything that happens to me at this event? And I normally don't sign waivers. I normally cross them out and initial them. They're normally optional. Okay, even though somebody says you need to sign this, well, actually, it's an optional clause that you can cross out. Now, they may not agree to have you move forward as a speaker. They may not agree to have you have access to the show, to the event, if you're an attendee, unless you sign their written waivers. But I think most people will agree to a waiver without knowing they're even agreeing to it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's in that fine print.
It's a fine print, but fine print oftentimes works depending on which state you're in. So whether you're signing up online through a traditional landing page, sales funnel, or traditional offline tickets, check to see if there's a waiver or an assumption of risk provision. An assumption of risk provision basically says, like I used to ride and race motocross for 38 years, and we go to the track every day, you sign a document. It's an assumption of risk document that says, if you get jacked up while doing laps on the track, it's your fault. You're the one, you're the only, it's not even your fault. You're the one assuming the risk, all medical bills, any injuries, it's on you, cowboy, right? So we used to sign these things. And so the same things happen with events and happen with conferences. Oftentimes these assumption of risk documents are optional. So I would pay attention to those items so that you're going in with your eyes open, and then you can decide for not only you or your team members, or if you're like me, let me show you my team members. I actually came downstairs into my den. This is Team Jackson back in the day, okay? Sign a waiver or assumption of risk document. I'm thinking about these guys, okay? And she's now 25 and a lawyer in LA, and Garrett, is now 20 and in his second year at USC, which, by the way, we understand they're going to be shutting down their classes, a lot of schools across the country, and going online. So this is affecting everybody.
Yeah, and we want to thank Janie Culligan is watching over on LinkedIn, as well as Steve Taylor and Peter Sumpton, who helps Addison Zhang with her show. So thank you all for being here. And I actually just noticed before in Google News or something that Google is actually having all their employees work remotely now.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about speakers, attendees, and conferences, but when you look at the employee relationships, when you look at large universities, it's an interesting time, right? And everything we're talking about really does revolve around contract law. What agreements are you entering into? If you're a speaker and you're not using agreements, you're appearing after sharing a Twitter DM back and forth, maybe a couple of text messages. I get how it works, right? I understand that a lot of us are doing that. This is a good opportunity to maybe step back and put your speaking agreement together, throw it up on DocuSign where it's just a quick click, digital signature, and everybody's protected. This is a big wake-up call, right, for all of us, I think. And I think for those of us presenting online, it's a big wake-up call to get more up to speed on webinar and video and live video production techniques. Maybe work with a speaking coach or an improv coach to improve how you go about doing things. Bring in a production company so you can have different camera angles and get those music licenses so you can incorporate music into your shows. It's a lot, more difficult. It's not easier said than done, but I do see this as the future for everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I think too, to the point with your son at USC going to online. I mean, I know my daughters have been attending college online, and I think that is going to become more and more the future. And maybe, right, in the big scheme of things, that'll lower the cost of college, which I know would be a good thing. Not to get political, but I think you can learn so much. Everybody learns differently. Yeah, there's obviously people want to learn stuff online, but I also thought it was interesting. Mike Alton from Agora Pulse, that whole company works remotely, and they get together. They do an annual, in-person event, and I think they do some quarterly stuff. So there's already companies doing that. I think so much of what we deal with, to your point, Mitch, is we're like kind of stuck in the past, and it's that resistance to change. And if this really, should make people open up their eyes. There's a lot of very successful online businesses, and maybe it's time for some of these businesses to take a second look at how they're doing things, just even from a liability standpoint.
Absolutely. There's nothing better than meeting somebody in real life. And I grew up before the internet, started my business before all of this stuff. So I know what it was like at one time. I know what it's like now, and I like this a lot better. It allows the three of us to do this conference together without having to all fly into the same town. That's the way it used to be. We would have to be in the same city. Right. You mentioned Agora Pulse, one of my favorite social media platforms. When we had a family trip last year to Paris, guess who I made a point to go see? I went over to the Agora Pulse office in Paris, And Emmerich and I got a chance to meet each other for the first time. He's the CEO and founder of Agorapulse. Got to meet their team, and there's something special about just meeting people one-on-one, right? But now when you take that onto the digital platforms, as Mike Alton does so well, I'm a big Mike Alton fan, it makes the experience more meaningful. It enriches everything that's being shared. And so I think today we're going to have to maybe think twice before putting ourselves, into large physical conference type of environments, and really think about, what are the long-term implications or ramifications by doing this. I'm not necessarily worried about me getting sick. And if I do any more than just a bad cold, I'm a pretty healthy person. What I'm worried about is me catching the virus and then walking into a room someplace else, and God forbid, infecting somebody who is old, who's predisposed to, having some bad experiences with the coronaviruses. And I think that's the way people need to think. It's how are we transmitting it? And it's an exponential type of situation. So, I think the future's in digital. And, going back to day one, when, I don't know if you guys remember, Spreecast was one of the original live video platforms. It was adopted by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, LA Times. Katie Couric and I did a show together, Anderson Cooper. A lot of really interesting connections happened on Spreecast, which was founded by the gentleman that created StubHub. If you guys remember StubHub, and Jeff Floor sold StubHub, started Spreecast. The long story short is it opened my eyes to, wow, I'm engaging with people from all over the world where it would not happen if it wasn't for live video. Now it's no longer around. It was ahead of its time. Our smartphones back then were 2 and 3G, and they could not handle the bandwidth. So imagine that. But we've all moved forward, and we've continued to pick up and embrace this technology. And along the way, we've learned how to do business a little bit different. That's the point of what I'm trying to say. And you ask a lawyer a question, it's a long answer. But the point of what I'm trying to say is what we used to do offline, we're doing online. And just because it's easier to do these things online by pointing and clicking or tapping and swiping, ease does not eliminate or reduce the need for contracts, for agreements, okay? So even though things are more easy and faster than ever, back up everything you do with a good written agreement. And I think 99% of the time that's going to protect you when you have a situation like this. You're a speaker, your events are being canceled. Mark Schaefer, and you guys know Mark Schaefer, is a dear friend of mine. He rolled out a blog post yesterday about what he's doing right now. And he's approaching it from a glass half full reality standpoint, like this is what I'm working on right now. And the reason I'm bringing that up is it's always been that way with me. In other words, when business slows down, and I've been in business for 34 years, when business slows down, rather than worrying about it or complaining about it, like other attorneys that I know in town, I was always, okay, I finally have 2 days. I've got 2 days right now to just hustle and get this project done and get the website updated and meet 10 people like I've been needing to do at this particular company. There's always something to do, right? So I think a lot of smart business owners, a lot of keynote speakers, a lot of social media agencies, they're using this opportunity as an opportunity to pivot as opposed to complain,
right?
To modify and improve as opposed to shutting things down and calling it a day. For me, change, disruption, these are all opportunities. And that's why when you guys reached out to me, I'm like, I'd love to be on the show because I think this is an opportunity for everyone to help keep each other safe, but at the same time, from a business standpoint, really raise the bar and start doing things a different way.
And that really leads to another, I think, really good question. Tim, you want to ask Mark or Mitch this question? You're talking about Mark. I got Mark Schaefer.
Mitch, what do you recommend as the next steps for a business to keep their awareness up in this time?
So when you ask awareness up, awareness as to things that might disrupt conferences, might disrupt product sales, things like that.
Right. Well, like, how should they be like planning for the future based on what's happened? Like, now that this is happening, what do you really think they really need to focus? I mean, I think you hit on some of it earlier with like looking at your agreements and protecting yourself, but are there any other things that you really think? And I think even the market, for example, great one as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's start by reading Mark's post that rolled out yesterday. Mark Schaefer, he did a good job at that. But I think in business, you always want to plan for contingencies. You always want to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And so when it comes to doing business, regardless of what you're doing for a living, really take a step back and maybe crowdsource ideas in a room or on a digital platform like this with your team, your employees, with your mastermind, with your top 10 smartest business friends whose opinions matter. You know, what's the worst thing that can happen over the next 12 to 24 months in our industry? Maybe it's another infectious disease. Maybe it's innovation and modification of existing products and services. You know, something like the whole Blockbuster type of scenario. If they sat down on day one and really thought this thing through, they probably, wouldn't be out of business. You know, but Netflix comes along and takes over the market. So I think the same thing applies with the taxi cab companies and Uber, legal industries. Plan for the worst case scenario and have things set up so if it happens, you're ready, and if it doesn't happen, you're in good shape. I will tell you, just in all the different groups I'm in, people that have already embraced the cloud, people that are already, they can basically connect with a laptop or a phone and run their business. Their accounting software is online. I'm a brand ambassador for Ruby Receptionist, just so you guys know, full disclosure. But regardless of what happens, our phones, which is our lifeline, they're going to be handled, right? We physically don't need to be in the office. All of our contact management and law firm related technology is in the cloud. Everyone could just start up their phone or fire up their laptop and we're good to go. We can meet clients using products like this or Zoom or Skype or whatever it might be, FaceTime. So I think the answer to that question is be able to be flexible, to pivot and embrace the cloud in all of your technology so that when something happens, you're already there. I mean, honestly, whatever happens over the next 2 months, you're not going to see much change as to how we're running our law firm because we're already doing this thing.
Right. Now, speaking of law firms, and I guess I'm being a little selfish because my wife's a court reporter. How do you see this potentially?
The most important person in the courtroom, by the way.
I'll make sure, and I'm going to let her know that you said that.
Yeah.
But how do you see this even potentially impacting, like, say, your industry where people go into a courtroom? Do you potentially see where they may almost, I don't want to call it telecourt, but may change some of that?
Absolutely. And yeah, it's going to change all industries. Judges are not going to unnecessarily subject their court personnel, witnesses, jurors, counsel, people in the audience. They're not going to subject any of us to an unnecessary risk. So that'll probably be predicated upon what's reported in the courtroom, in the courthouse. Have there been any viruses? Have there been any issues? You know, when I first started practicing, you used to be able to just walk right into the courthouse and into the courtroom. Maybe it was the same with your wife. Today, we go through metal detectors. Today, we've got security at the entry to each courtroom, and that's probably the way it should be. And things have changed. Things have changed because society's changed. Well, I think what we're seeing today has also changed. And I think although the courts are a little bit slower in making these changes, more so than other industries, I do see change taking place. I don't know if you know this, but at least here in California, we can do a lot of our appearances, a lot of our routine, which are called case management conferences, where everybody's just kind of checking in. This is where we are in the case, Your Honor. This is what we think is going to happen next. There's not really a lot of advocacy going on. We've been doing that by phone for about 10 years now, and video options available. Mm-hmm. And so I always like, with important hearings, I like to be there for obvious reasons. But when it's just a routine management type of thing, what I see happening, to answer your question, is more and more lawyers using this type of technology to take care of those routine matters.
Right.
It's just safe, it's efficient, it saves the client money, it saves everybody time. But yeah, I think this is going to affect every industry. So the industries that are ahead of the curve, imagine you're a social media agency, you're a law firm, you're even a medical, a medical practice, promoting online on your website, in your literature. Listen, we don't require you to physically show up. We can do a complimentary 20-minute legal analysis over Zoom, or a medical examination over Skype, just to get the ball rolling. We don't want you to walk into our waiting room, which may have 10 sick people in there coughing that haven't been diagnosed yet. So I think smart professionals and smart businesses will use this technology as a way to show, hey, we care about you, client, patient, customer. We're making this option available to you. And I think companies that do that, and frankly, who have already done that, that's where we're going to see some positive change.
So it's interesting. Steve Taylor commented that he was attempting to get some travel insurance that would cover the epidemics, but none of it does. And so I don't know, maybe that's an opportunity for some of these insurance companies to really look at adding that risk in. So he's in a sense having to take some risk there. So I think that's interesting.
Well, but when you talk about travel insurance, oftentimes when you're buying airline tickets, for example, you have cancellation insurance. This does, ask questions and see what options are out there. I'll tell you right now, on events that I'm scheduled to speak at, that the ones that are still active, other than a conflict I have with one because of a case that was set for trial, we will be reaching out. We'll be seeing whether or not my team and I fall under any liability policies, any health insurance policies, if any medical bills are incurred that fall out of my personal health insurance policy for something that may happen. And I've never really thought about it before, so this is even making me think twice. Do they have coverage to step up, to pay the deductible, to take care of any any unforeseen expenses? I think these, and the answer doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to go, but it just, in my mind, the way my mind works is I just want answers to the questions. So for the gentleman that just shared his travel insurance expense question, have you called and talked to 5 different carriers?
Right.
See what the competition's doing out there. And yeah, it's a tough time. So This affects all of us. It affects the speakers, the conference and event planners, and the attendees.
Right. And go ahead, Tim.
Okay. I was just going to say, we want to thank Jennifer Quinn for joining us, as well as Gabrielle. And Gary Casey asks, couldn't the liability be eliminated under force majeure as an illness?
So force majeure is a contract term that basically, the easiest way to think about it is if we have an agreement. If I have an agreement for Tim and Jim to speak at my conference here in California, and there is an unexpected earthquake, that just knocked the whole conference center down to the ground. Everyone's safe and sound, but there's no place to have a conference. So in most speaking agreements, that would avoid Tim and Jim from having to fly out and attend a conference on the rubble. It also avoids me having to pay their speaking fees because this was something beyond our control.
Right.
So that's generally what that clause means. Whether or not that clause would include the decision by ABC Corporation, that means ABC, just a random corporation, XYZ Corporation, to cancel a conference because they feel it may not be safe because somebody in one city over was diagnosed with coronavirus. I don't necessarily feel, and although I am a lawyer and a pretty good lawyer, I'm not the lawyer of anyone listening to this, so this is not legal advice, but I don't think that falls under that clause. In other words, that's an intentional decision made by someone putting on a conference based upon something he or she thinks may happen. It's not an act of God. So there's a difference. So you want to have a cancellation clause in your speaking agreement that really lays out, listen, as the speaker, I have the right to cancel if, and then A, B, C, D, E. I think the most common one is If the deposit, the 50% of my speaking fee, is not made within 30 days of the speaking event, then I have the unilateral option of canceling my appearance. That might be one. Number two may be something to do with infectious disease, where you as a speaker have the option. You have the option of bowing out. Whether or not you have to return the deposit, once again, you have that delineated in writing. So I think of the cancellation fee, cancellation clause as being somewhat different than what we just talked about. But you want to have a thorough cancellation clause for all the reasons we talked about. My cancellation clause is so detailed that it even goes down to who other speakers may be. I have to be careful with who I'm on stage with or at events with, okay? And it has to do with reputation and brand and conflicts of interest. So a lot of times I'll be asked to speak before the final speaking agenda has been laid out. And I have last discretionary approval on whether or not I want to be in the same room, much less on the same stage with certain individuals, certain companies. So that's how detailed you can go. I'm up front with the host from day one. And we all know that until all those names are finalized, my appearance is not set in stone. And I'd suggest other speakers do the same thing, because I think it can dilute your brand if you're at the wrong event in front of the wrong people on stage with the wrong person. It may not be a good career move. So that would be something I would have in my cancellation provision.
I think that's a great point, Mitch. Especially as we talk more and more about people's personal brands, I think that's extremely important to think about who you are, in a sense, whether it's intentional or unintentional, could be looked at as being associated with. So I really love the fact that you've thought it through, though, right? And everything is intentional. When I think in these times, people have to really think about what they're doing, and I think what you've done to date, at least for me, Tim, I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, but I think I feel more comfortable about like what we can do. And I do think, as you said, there's some opportunities here for businesses, and we shouldn't all get so worried like that the sky is falling. We just need to to Mark Schaefer's thing, like just take a deep breath and think about, what can I do to position myself to continue to be successful?
And it's interesting because a lot of people that agree with what you just said, and I'm one of them, they then take their presentation, their show online, and they try to adopt everything we talked about, but they don't put the time in to perfect their skills. They don't use the right technology to give the right end result. And so there's also the opportunity for those of you that are willing to work and implement and put into force and effect the things we talked about. You have the chance of really crafting out a unique brand and business opportunity. At the same time, I think we're going to see people falling by the wayside. People that don't have the time, the energy, the inclination, or they're too lazy to do the things we're talking about, they're not going to be around in 12 months. Right. So it's kind of a thinning of the herd type of scenario with respect to the speaking industry. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing from a business standpoint. It's a terrible thing when it comes to disease and infectious diseases. Absolutely. But we're talking apples and oranges. So,
Tim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this has been a fascinating conversation, especially from the perspective of somebody who is, I also love face-to-face conversations. I love, one of the best ways that I've gotten new clients and built relationships is holding or attending workshops here in Northeast Pennsylvania, or going to the social media marketing world, or whatever the event may be. So I think this has been a really enlightening conversation in terms of looking at digital and really the future of digital and events. Yeah. So I just thank you for being here and sharing these really important points with our viewers, Mitch.
It's been my pleasure. Yeah.
And we did have Diane would like to know if there's a way somewhere, Mitch, that you can share some of the apps, the platforms that you're using, and even maybe some other suggestions you have about, the trust you can turn in-person conferences into innovative virtual events. And I know I think you have some stuff on your website, don't you?
So I do. So probably, Diane, the easiest answer would be if you go to, if you connect with me at streaming.lawyer, which is my non-legal blog for social media, digital, and live video. It's streaming.lawyer. If you can't connect with me there, I'd be happy to go into detail on all the above. But if you go to streaming.lawyer/brands, those are companies that I've partnered with, who I use their services. And I think some of the resources that you just asked me about are listed there. But it sure changes quickly with technology, right? The live video company that a lot of us used 2 years ago isn't even around today. Right. So it's interesting, but we can start our dance there if you'd like, Diane. It's my pleasure.
Right. And Mitch, I know one place people can connect with you on a lot of the socials is at Streaming Lawyer. What are some of the other
places?
Mitch
Jackson. At Mitch Jackson.
At Mitch Jackson, okay.
But just so you know, so it's at my name, Mitch Jackson. Streaming.lawyer is a blog I set up before heading down to Social Media Day San Diego about 4 or 5 years ago, and wanted to walk my talk with entrepreneurs, Jim, and show them how you could set up a free WordPress blog, take advantage of live video and live streaming, and actually create a platform. And so that's what I did with that blog years ago. I wanted to walk my talk, because a lot of entrepreneurs complain about, well, it costs so much money to get started and the resources aren't out there. And so I just created this little community using free WordPress tools back in the day, free live video. And it's like, here it is, you guys. It didn't cost me a dime. It took a little time and effort. So I don't want to hear that as an excuse. And I don't want to go all Gary Vee on everybody, but it does come down to putting in the time, putting in the energy, working smart. I actually, that's where he and I disagree a little bit. I think I'm into a more work-life balance approach, working smart. I just told someone last week at a meeting, she's starting her law firm. She's in her 3rd year, amazing individual. And, she goes, Mitch, what's, 34 years, how do you do it? You're still excited about what you do. I said, well, a couple of things. Number one, I'm very selective about the people I represent, right? So make good decisions, learn how to say no. Number two, I treat it like a part-time business. And that kind of threw her off a little bit. I said, look, practicing law, you're going to be behind for the rest of your life. And Jim, you know this with your wife. I'm sure your wife comes home as a court reporter and tells you stories, right?
Right.
And I said, you're going to be behind. It's stressful. There's a lot going on. You're never caught up. It is a full-time job. But if you treat it as a part-time job where you give yourself permission to grab lunch and see a movie on a Thursday afternoon, or after 3 or 4 hours of sitting at your desk, push away, throw on your running shoes and get out for an hour and go work out or go for a run. Everything's going to be there when you get back, right? And it's like you start treating it as a part-time job. Even when I'm in trial, I have actually written blogs back in the day, a 2-week trial, and each night I would get home and share what happened that day in trial. It was therapy for me. And people were like, well, how do you have time to do that? How come you're not preparing for tomorrow? Well, I've tried so many cases. I'm ready to go. I could try a case tomorrow morning. Give me the file. But, I was ready. But I also, for me, it was just therapeutic to just kind of talk about what's going on. But what was interesting about that is people were following it, right? And it helped me build my brand back in the day. So it was win-win for everyone. But it also allowed me to treat that full-time 2-week trial as a part-time effort. And I think from a mental health standpoint, it's really smart for all of us to keep things in perspective, focus on the family, and to try to make each day our masterpiece.
Awesome. Well, Mitch, thank you so much. Tim, any final thoughts?
Just thanks again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure, you guys. I'm always here for you, so reach out if there's anything I can ever do.
Thank you. And next week, we'll have Dan Jordan, the sales energizer, on. He's a guy I've become friends with here in Atlanta, and he is definitely like the Energizer Bunny. So that'll be a very enjoyable session. And thanks again, Mitch. And we look forward to following you. And I'm going to drop in the links, some of the other articles that Mitch has recently written concerning the coronavirus. Make sure you're following Mitch, because he's definitely keeping up with this in a professional way that really is being helpful to everyone. So thanks we had quite a few viewers, not only on Facebook and LinkedIn, considering the fact that we had to restart the show due to technical difficulties, but it just shows you that it happens to all of us, and you shouldn't let yourself get frustrated. So Mitch, thank you for your patience in getting this going today. Really enjoyed this, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
I would love to. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tim. You guys take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.